the original idea was that there was kind of like pretty much the same bad guy like in Wild Wild West, the movie, so this crazy general, and he was trying to build an army of zombies.
Why are you called Mimimi games?
Because we cry all the time.
So even until today, if you would take the intro of Desperados and would put the Bon Jovi song under it, it just feels perfectly in the beginning. If you just see the rails and the song starts.
Compared to other games at that time, they were like super cinematic and deep storytelling, deep storylines, and it was like mind-blowing when you played them.
Sometimes was very kind of like, yeah, can you take out all more or less the strategy elements and make it more an adventure game? And we were like kind of like, no, this is not the game we're going to do.
The Desperados series is turning 20. To celebrate the birthday, we've talked with Ralf Adam, producer of Desperados Wanted Dead or Alive, and Dominik Abe of Mimimi Games, designer for Desperados III, about inspiration, failings, learnings, and how to successfully revive a genre and a franchise. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about where Desperados came from. Do you remember what the first idea was, what kind of the first pitch was? What kind of game this would become?
Yeah, so back at that time I was working for Infogrames, which was one of the biggest publishers back in the day, so that was the late 90s, 99 to be precise, and I was there in the strategy label, which they had just founded. So we were out looking for new strategy titles we could sign, or tactic games, anything in that genre. And I actually stumbled upon a screenshot in the PC Games, which was a big magazine, big German magazine back in the days, that had one screenshot of the game, and it said Spellbound, the creators of the Gianna Sisters series and their studio head Armin Gessert are working on a new game, and they just gave us this exclusive screenshot. And we were kind of like intrigued, especially I was at Infogrames, which was a company based in Lyon, but I was in the German office. And obviously I was aware of that Spellbound was also a German company. So I just picked up the phone because I knew Armin, the CEO of that studio, and just called him and say, hey, I read here in the PC Games that you're working on a new title and this is looking great. And it seems to be something around a tactic strategy game. And we're looking for these kind of games actually. Would you be up to talk with us about it? And so that was actually the start. So I drove down with my boss to Kehl, just close to Strasbourg. So it's at the French border, so still in Germany, but close to the French border, to the Alsace. And well, we paid the studio a visit, and they showed us the very early prototype, and it just looked fantastic. And we were kind of like, okay, we need to get this title no matter what. And we started negotiating. And if you get confused, because if you have the game at home and look at it and it says Atari, that was still Infogrames. So Infogrames bought the Atari brand as well, amongst many other things, and just renamed themselves into Atari, but it was still Infogrames. So it was for a while it was Atari/Infogrames, and later it was just Atari. I'm confused myself what it was at that time.
The developers at Spellbound had already made their name with the Super Mario-inspired Gianna Sisters. Jean-Marc Hessig is still creative director at the studio today, although they've renamed themselves to Black Forest Games to honor their home. Back then, Jean-Marc had already channeled his love for the science fiction genre into a Perry Rhodan game, based on a still ongoing series of novellas that might lack international fame, but have been called Germany's Star Trek. Science fiction wasn't his only love, though.
He was a big fan of a series which was not that well known in Germany. It was well known in France and also I think in the United States. It was called Wild Wild West. It became later famous again because there was this movie with Will Smith. They made a movie out of it, but originally that was a series from the 70s, I think. And he was a big fan of that. That was one of his main source of inspiration. Then obviously the Sergio Leone and all the classic spaghetti Western. But also he had another kind of source of inspiration because he's French. So he works in Germany, but he lives in Strasbourg, and he's originally an artist. So he was creative director, but his roots are in drawing and painting. And he's a big fan also of a guy called Möbius, who did very classic Western kind of like cartoons, like the Marvels, but in a Western setting. So those were his main sources of inspiration for the original game. And from a game perspective, I mean, obviously all kind of like tactic games. I mean, there are roots of some Metal Gear Solid is in that game. Obviously, the biggest game we've always got compared to, and I mean, rightfully as well, was the Commando series, which came out before us from Pyro Studios in Spain. And that was also, of course, a game we played a lot and where we took some inspiration out and tried to take over what we liked in that game, but make it give it a different style, make it more cineastic and everything that is Desperados now.
And looking back, do you remember what that first prototype looked like and the things that changed?
I still have it. I don't know which level exactly. I guess the fans out there will know it, because for me it's 20 years ago and I played the game a couple of times afterwards again, but I forgot which exact level it is. But it's in the second part of the game. Must be level, if I guess it would be 16, 17. But there is a scenario where the gang comes into the town with a train. And then they leave the train and enter the train station. And right when you start the level, there are, I think, 5, 6 bad guys in front of you, and you have your gang, and you need to get out of the situation by kind of like with this quick action function that you have a program that everybody shoots down one of the other opponents. So there's kind of like a shootout scene right at the beginning of this level, and it's obviously kind of like reminiscence to the famous train scene in Once Upon a Time in the West with Charles Bronson. And that level actually, or that scene, they already had in the prototype. It wasn't as polished, but it already showed the final art to a certain extent. I mean, there were a lot of props and everything that make the level even more detailed and more lively. All of these things were still missing, but it already had the final train station, and this kind of like scene. That was the very first thing they had. And they only had this one action that you could shoot. So all the other actions that you can make in the game weren't in that prototype yet. But just that scene, it transported so much of this Western feeling already and what they tried to achieve with the game, or what they achieved with the game, Spellbound. And B, it already has had this, what we call in game development, the pacing. So it had the right kind of like timing when you were programming the action and the animation, and everything was already very smooth. So just with that very small prototype, or that very small part of that level, it already showed what the game could become. And we were kind of like, we want that.
Almost 20 years after Desperados, Wanted Dead or Alive, the young development studio of Mimimi Games revived the franchise. Why are you called Mimimi Games?
Because we cry all the time.
Is it such a hard job to be a developer?
Yeah. And my colleague founder, Johannes, he was like, you guys are always like mimimiing, like crying about stuff. And then we were like, haha, let's have this as a team name. And then it just have been stuck since then. Very contradicts a lot to the games we're doing right now, but that's also fun. So I don't know. It's not where you would expect hardcore tactical games.
Let's first talk about how it came to be that you worked on Desperados 3.
Basically, we were always like following what Commandos and Desperados was doing, and they were not doing much or like anything at all. But we had always an eye out for if somebody would work on them, if there would be a possibility to work on them, because we liked them so much. So even before we started Shadow Tactics or something, we kind of checked some information, and then there was this IP transfer to THQ, and then it popped out, okay, they're now buying that IP, and obviously they want at some point do something with it. So we, pretty early, even during development of Shadow Tactics, we approached them and asked them if they would possibly want to do at some point something with us. And it was not on the highest priority list because the genre at that point was dead. But when Shadow Tactics came out, it very fast came clear that there is potential in that genre, and also that we would be now the perfect fit because we already worked so much with that genre, which nobody else did at that time. So I think that made it a very clear fit for them to work with us on the IP. And for me personally, it was like, yeah, that is one of my dreams, because those like Commandos and Desperados were always the games that influenced me the most. So it was like a no-brainer. So I don't know. Compared to other games at that time, they were like super cinematic and deep storytelling, deep storylines, and it was like mind-blowing when you played them back then. So, and that spirit we really wanted to keep. And also it was quite clear that we wanted to make a prequel, because we would not want anybody to require knowledge to like get back into that IP. And that was also so much potential in like, oh, they have those cool characters, but they never told like how they met. So that was pretty cool to be allowed and able to like tell that part of the story of the universe. That was super fun.
Let's talk a little bit about the setting. If I remember correctly, it was supposed to be weirder, so
yes. Yep.
with supernatural elements in the beginning.
And that goes also what I've learned then back later from Jean-Marc. That goes back to this one source I've mentioned before, which was Wild Wild West. I mean, also in the movie with Will Smith. I mean, most people may have not seen the series, but I think the movie is still kind of like present. There is, this guy without the legs, but he's sitting in this kind of like spider wheelchair, and there are all sorts of weird mechanic things and stuff like that. And that was something they also wanted in their game. So, and it would go even one step further. So the original idea was that there was kind of like pretty much the same bad guy like in Wild Wild West, the movie. So this crazy general, and he was trying to build an army of zombies. So he was creating zombies. And I don't remember whether those had some roots to the more supernatural with voodoo, or if it was something more mechanical, but at least he was supposed to build up a zombie army. And that's why also one of the characters, Mia, was in the game, because originally the plan was to give her a katana sword, so she would have been the only one who would have been able to kill the zombies. And we were kind of like, I mean, we loved this fantastic Western scenario and everything, but in any case, we were kind of like, this blending of these kind of like two genres, we're not too convinced. What about if we maybe just turn it into a pure, real spaghetti Western? So instead of going full crazy, go more into Clint Eastwood style. And they liked it. I mean, they were kind of like, they had still some doubts on their end as well, whether the zombie idea, this mixture would have been a good idea or not. And our proposal was actually, look guys, what we can do is we make it a serious Western game. The game it is now, well, serious, it also has some humorous aspects, obviously, but more on the lighthearted side, not on the crazy side. And we said, if it goes really well, we may start some spin-offs, and maybe then we can explore some more crazy territory. So maybe in the future do an add-on with some zombies or something like that. And they were, no, that's cool, that's a cool idea, let's just do that. Also back in that, during that time, the game had still the working title Death Valley, also kind of like a bit more moving into the direction of this whole zombie aspect, which in the end it didn't have.
I have to ask then, when you were working on that, did you know that in Desperados 1 they actually had planned to have more of these weirder elements of magic and mechanics and zombies in there? Okay, you did know.
Yeah, I know. That story, Ralph, I think totals, I don't know, maybe even 5 years ago or something, like even, I think for Shadow Tactics we already knew that. So that was also one reason why we were like, okay, they had already ideas like that. They wanted to make it more crazy. And so we also thought then that's another like reason maybe why we can have that in it.
Do you remember when the decision was made to call the game Desperados, and why?
Yeah, so we signed the game late 99. Must have been something like October, November. It came out in, well, April 2001. I think that's also one of the reasons for this interview, because we're celebrating pretty much by today the 20th release date. And I think the zombie decision was already when we were still in a contract negotiation. So we told them, look, guys, we don't want to sign a contract now and then later say you need to change the story. That would be bad publisher behavior, but we want you to be aware that we want to sign the game, but only if we can turn it into a full Western game. And they say, no, that's fine, that's okay. And we signed a contract within 1 month, I think. So it was all really fast. And so we still lived with Death Valley for a while, I think, maybe another 4 or 5 months. We were kind of, it's a cool title. I mean, it still fits for a Western, even if it's without zombies. We may leave it or not. But then ultimately we said, no, maybe let's change it. And then we were looking for a new name.
The team would have loved to use the name Desperados, but there was one tiny problem. There already was a game called Desperados, a budget shooter by GT Interactive.
Spellbound told us we can't use the name. But the funny thing is, exactly at that time, Infogrames was on a buying spree, so they had a lot of money, and they bought Ocean, which was a huge English publisher, developer, and they also bought actually GT Interactive in the United States. And GT Interactive had the rights for this Desperados game that was sold at Walmart. So we actually, with that, had the rights name, and we're sure nobody could sue us if we used this name again for a bigger title. And so we just decided, okay, we take Desperados, we just need a subtitle. And then I think it was me who came up with the subtitle Wanted Dead or Alive, which again was kind of like the idea came from another source of inspiration, and that was the Bon Jovi song. Because at that time we were already working on the cutscenes, because Desperados has a lot of cutscenes, and part of the unique selling point, at least back in those days, was we wanted to give it a big entry with the large intro, but then also after each level, as some kind of a reward, we would also show another cutscene and tell the story even further with high-res rendered cutscene, which were big these back in 20 years ago. I mean, these days you do it in engine, but back then that was really a big thing. And for the intro, we already had kind of like a lot of the cinematics, and just for fun, I always put, as we didn't have any music back then yet, I always put Wanted Dead or Alive, the song from Bon Jovi, under it, and it was fitting perfectly. So even until today, if you would take the intro of Desperados and would put the Bon Jovi song under it, it just feels perfectly. In the beginning, if you just see the rails and the song starts and goes to the first climax, it's perfect. And that went that far that we actually asked Bon Jovi, our marketing department in France reached out to their managers, but they wanted 1 million flat for the buyout for just this one song. And I mean, the game was less than 1 million back in the day, so yeah, it was too expensive, unfortunately.
Looking back at where the game came from initially, what do you think about that supernatural elements made it back into the setting? Is the kind of fulfillment of the promise that you made back then?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely love it. They did it in the third part. I even for an add-on, if it would have been zombies, at least the zombies they had in mind, because again, what Spellbound had in mind was really more zombies, like, from George R. Romero mixed with Wild Wild West. And you could say in the Desperados 3, the voodoo lady also turns the opponents into kind of like zombies, but this is really the original kind of like zombies, and it fits the setting so perfectly with this New Orleans setting and this whole voodoo aspect. So it really, it's perfectly embedded, and I like it much better now the way it is than what we originally had in mind. So yeah.
Many players' first contact with the Desperados game was through a demo that was distributed in cereal boxes, of all things. Yeah. Something that keeps coming back is that many people, their first contact with the game was actually in a cereal box.
Yes.
How did that happen?
The marketing, that was all more handled in France in the headquarters, because they had a big marketing department there. So they actually made that deal. And it's funny because a lot of people up until today, reach out to me and say, oh, do you remember the cereal box? And it was so fantastic. And I was like, yeah, I wish I could claim I had the idea for that, but that wasn't me. I mean, the demo itself was great in a way that we also did something that was, we were not the only ones, but it was still very unique. We made a demo level that was not part of the original game, because that's what most developers and publishers did back in the days. They took one level out of the game and made it a demo level. But we actually created just for the demo a completely new level that was telling kind of like a little prequel to the actual Desperados stories. So it's just a day in the life of John Cooper and his gang when they're out for, bounty hunting. And that was very unique. And also, I mean, the thing is, we did that level very late. So, I mean, if you start making a game and if you build the first levels, you first have to get into it. You try out a lot of things, you thrash a lot of things, you redo levels until you really fully understand how all your game mechanics works best together in the game. And so when we made the demo level, we had a complete understanding of the game mechanics and how we could build a great level together. So in my opinion, the demo level is one of the best levels because all of our learnings that we made the past year before that went into that level, obviously.
Tell me a little bit about how the game also in some places, as far as I know, had to be changed for an international release. Because, as you said, the sources that Spellbound was working on were very European, like basically the spaghetti westerns, French comics, things like that. So now if you want to sell this game to people from the USA, basically give them this European version of their Western setting.
It was very funny. I remember we were out at E3, the big show, back in the days to demo your games in the United States, in Los Angeles, in the convention center. And we were demoing the game to American press. And the first question they asked us is, you guys are from Europe, how dare you, more or less, to make a Western, which is kind of like our native genre here in the United States. And then you make this kind of like spaghetti Western and it looks so Sergio Leone and this is all ours. And we were like, do you know why these Westerns were called spaghetti Westerns? And the journalists were looking at us and we were like, they were all shot down in Italy. And they're, no, you're lying. This is not true. And they were not believing us that actually most of the Sergio Leone Westerns were shot down in Italy or in Spain and other European places. And so they were so completely under the impression this is so United States in its roots, which it is with regards to the story, obviously, and everything it is there. But especially the Western, we tried to transport and to cover and kind of like to remake it to a game. We're actually more a European thing, at least from where they were shot and everything. So that was very funny. I mean, there were a couple of things with regards to that. The cover, for example, I don't know if you've ever seen the United States cover box. It looks completely different than the European ones. The European ones I think it shows John Cooper, Kate, and who's the third one? I would even need to look. Doc, I think. So the three main heroes in close-ups, in the rendered style, like they're at least in the cutscene, and below there is, I think, another scene from the game, from the cutscenes. And the US cover showed all heroes, which I kind of liked, but they were all drawn and looked more like cartoons, which still for me until today, if I look at the box, it looks weird to me, but I mean, I was used to it that US boxes always look completely different to European boxes. What I also loved about the US boxes, they sold it in a big box, not in a DVD case, which I like better. So that was one of the things. Another thing which I think is hilarious, in Europe, we obviously had, with the theme of the game and what you're doing, had some age rating issues. So we were always kind of like struggling, okay, how far can we go with the violence and what can we show and blood and everything. And we ended up with a 12 rating, which was the thing we wanted to achieve. But we definitely had to turn down some of the violence. And for the US version, they asked us to put in more blood, but we were supposed to take out all the curse and swearing. So in the German version or the European version, Doc is always kind of like shit, I'm too old for this shit, and this kind of like, and this is all not in the US version. So they had to take out all the curse words, for example, which was a bit weird. And then we also had the famous scene in at the farm in the second level. This cotton farm, which is, I mean, today, if you look at Django Unchained, it's pretty much the same, only that also we had to tame it down with regards to that there are ladies, if you look closely, walking through the cotton fields, serving lemonade to all the workers there. to make it very kind of like worker-friendly environment. So those were some of the changes we actually had to do for the international version. But for me, the biggest kind of like laugh was still when they said, no, we want more violence but less of the curse words. And I was like, okay, for Europe that's different.
Please put in more blood.
Yes, okay. Yeah. Which I think we never did, by the way. I think there is no extra blood in the US version. Not that people not try to get the US version, because there might be a more bloody version. I think we left it the same just for time reasons, because that would have meant extra artwork and everything. So yeah.
So no more blood, but
no more
less
blood.
curses.
Yes.
Okay. Desperados 3 also got quite some recognition in the modding scene. Hours of work have been poured into reworked levels, some of them completely rewriting the story and creating a new game out of the puzzle pieces of the original. Desperados.mod.io collects several dozen levels with rewrites, solo missions, and fun new takes on the existing material. Considering the large number of existing mods, we decided to check out the second modded mission of Saxorad, a winner of the latest modding contest. It features a unique solo run with Doc McCoy and reworks the popular Flagstone level in very interesting ways. We contacted the creator of A Night Out and asked him a few questions about what makes his mod stand out. The mission took 2 days to make, with tools combining extended sheets, level editors from the community, and runtime Unity editor. Lots of time was spent on playtesting, getting the timing of waypoints and the placement of enemies right, so the flow would work and the level of difficulty would steadily increase throughout the mission. Doc was chosen as the solo mission character because his gameplay works for puzzles with groups of enemies, but he also has to take his time, which fits with the overall design of the mod. Also, his code could be taken off to give him a unique look for his solo run. So you can see, a lot of fiddling and a lot of thought went into this mission and into the other ones that are available. Do you, until today, do you have kind of your favorite level or your favorite scene from the game?
Yeah, my favorite level is definitely, and again, I hope the fans won't shoot at me if I say the wrong level, but it must be the level 21, which is, I think they're returning from the mine and getting back into this big city. And in the city, there are the bad guys, but there's also the cavalry that's trying to take over the city. So you're actually fighting two parties in that level. So you're in the upper left corner and need to get down to the train station, which I think is actually the train station that I've mentioned before, just on your way back. So the cavalry is on one side of the city and has conquered one side or one part of the city, and the bad guys are in the other part, and they're shooting at each other. And now you need to kill some of the bad guys, so the cavalry can go more north, and then you can walk around the cavalry, kill some of the cavalry, so the bad guys can go south, and you need to trick them out and play, let them fight each other. This is also a scene which was a bit inspired by The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, when they're also with the cavalry for a while. And in that movie, they need to destroy a bridge ultimately. But for us, it was kind of like playing with the cavalry and the bad guys, and you're kind of like in the middle. And this is definitely the level with the most enemies in one level. And it's also one of the hardest, but as there are so many enemies in that level, there are so many different ways you can also solve this level, which I really like about it. So that's my favorite one. I looked at all the levels again, at all the level maps, just from the layout. And I think one thing that is unique with regards to Eagle's Nest is that, except for one other level, which is the mine, which has a similar approach, but it's great, but Eagle's Nest is just outstanding. I mean, that's the first thing. Visually, you look at this, and this kind of like has spaghetti western and Sergio Leone all over it, just from the look. And then the other thing that is unique to that level compared to the other levels is the other levels are, you go from left to right to left or whatever. You're in a city, but it feels it's all on the same level of hate. While Eagle's Nest is more like a climb, so it really feels like you're climbing a mountain. So you're going not only inside this castle or this fortress, but you also have to get up, and you really need to get to the top of this tower. And I think this is a very special and unique approach, and it feels so obviously rewarding and satisfying once you're on the top. Because for the other levels, left, right, left, there's also a way of progress, but it's not as much in your face as it is with you climbing something up. So it has a certain kind of like, I guess it's similar to the satisfaction if you climb a mountain, actually. So there's this top, this peak you want to go, and when you're up there, you know what you've achieved. That might be one of the reasons. From a more game design analytic perspective, why this one is so popular, I think it's a mixture of many things. That also, what I've said before, it was one of the levels we had very early from the art, but the actual design and where do we place the opponents and what do we actually do in that level, we did later when we were more experienced with other levels. So we could also play more with already all the learnings we had and how we best place different groups of enemies into different areas. So also from a level design, I think that one is very, very strong.
Let's talk a little bit about while we're talking about old influences, new influences, things that obviously have to carry over from one Desperados game to the another, and that is the Eagle's Nest, which you decided to put in as a DLC. So was that kind of planned from the get-go? If we do a DLC, it has to be this level, or rather our take on this level?
So we always wanted to have like a level that's a homage to Desperados 1, or is like a Desperados 1 map, and we also have like Baton Rouge, but I think that's something where it's not so obvious, because Desperados maps, they have a very different scale than we need, because we adjusted a lot of things like how far the vision is and stuff like that, so you could not like copy one-to-one a map, and that's why it's not like super clear, and also it's like way earlier, so there's like stuff not built in Baton Rouge. But that was like the first homage, and also we had the Eagle's Nest at that point in mind, and we were like, okay, like one homage, but then we decided not to do Eagle's Nest because it's also like there's so much around it, like you would need to explain more why it's in there and how it's connected, and it would not like fit very well in our storyline as well. But then we had it back in our heads that when we would do a DLC, we want to do that because it's just this super iconic map, and yeah.
And how did that turn out working on that? How much did you have to tweak? How much did you have to change with the changed mechanics and move things around? Was that a long process?
I think it was then a not so long process, because at the point when you finished your game, you know so much about your game that you know, okay, this would work, this not, this we have to adjust. So we could be pretty straightforward. Obviously it needed iteration, and all the interesting part is like the map is now, there's Eagle's Nest, and there's like, it's just like 1/4 of the map that we built. So there's a lot around Eagle's Nest, and like figuring that out and making that like kind of logical, that it's still connected, because I think the original Eagle's Nest is just in the desert, and there would be no things around it, but you need stuff to have proper gameplay in it. So we had to build like a small old village or an old battlefield, and that was rather challenging to have something where we would be, okay, it's still very convincing because we just need a larger map. And that's where you see where it's very different, because like in the original one, it works as a full, like very long, big map. And in our game, because of the scale, it's like 1/4 of a map. So.
If you're watching this, you can win the smallest collector's edition in the whole Wild West, or a normal Desperados Collector's Edition, or the amazing original soundtrack on vinyl, or amazing Desperados artworks from Displayed. To participate, go to desperadosgame.com and follow the instructions. You will fill out a very short Desperados survey form to participate in the raffles and maybe influence the future of the Desperados franchise.
If you look at the soundtrack, I think there's something where it worked very well. When you like first listen to it, it's like most of the parts are like very guitar playing, and you know like the tunes, that's like the expectation is fulfilled when you listen to it. But if you listen closer, or as the songs develop, there's always like synthesizers and stuff like that would not be in the classical like Western music in there. And when you know it, it's pretty dominant, but when you don't know it, I think you just don't realize it in a way. But there's all the stuff that would make no real sense in the music, but that was a lot of fun, like bringing in, I don't know, like super techno bass drums in there, and then it still sounds like a Western. And
it sounds like a nice project, just trying to look how far you can push it until people actually openly notice while playing the game. Okay.
Yeah. And like all the tracks are developing differently, and also that aspect is when you look at the scenarios, like the landscapes where you play in, we have this, like the first scene is like super dusty, super classic, and the second scene is then super green and flourishing and stuff, and that's more like how modern Westerns look like. So those are like very like thoughtful decisions we made. So old, new. So like it's sometimes very obvious, but also I think not so obvious because people don't think in that way about it. So.
I mean, testing is another thing. If you would ask me about one thing that I kind of like regret and that I would have done differently, is the level of difficulty. Okay. Because Desperados 1 only has one level of difficulty, so you cannot switch. And we had one fixed QA. We had a couple of good QA team members, but we had not the luxury of changing the QA members all the time. But they knew the game from inside out and were there from the beginning until the end. And when you work like that, what obviously happens is that after having played a level for the 10th times, obviously everybody, including your QA, knows the game inside out. And what happens then is that you say, I can complete this game in 10 minutes. Let's make it harder. Oh, it's still too easy, so let's make it harder. Because obviously, once you know all the secrets of the level, I mean, you can always compete every level in a speedrun manner. And so we made some of the levels, unfortunately, a bit too hard. And 21 is by far the hardest level of all of them. So testing it already was a kind of like a challenge. But then testing it and not making it impossible for somebody who's playing it for the first time was even a bigger challenge. And I think with some level we did a better job, and with other levels, I must say, every time I looked at new people playing the game for the first time, I was like, oh, maybe. Maybe. And the sad thing is, it would have been very easy to actually add a level of difficulty, because I mean, everything was in a database. The behavior of all enemies, they were all in a database. So we could have just said, okay, on level easy, their line of sight is shorter. And it's just taking longer for them to reload. All these things that would have been for one coder, maybe 1 week to add that. And we thought, no, the game is fine as it is. Let's ship it. So that one extra week would have been very beneficial. Because, I mean, the game got great reviews, but if there was one thing everybody was complaining, if people complained, it was the level of difficulty.
Did you have a favorite character among the crew?
My favorite character, and I did the voice recordings for the German version. I also wrote most of the dialogues, actually. And I always played the German version, and especially in the German version. I think I've played the English version, but I can't even say how well he is there. But in the German version, Doc is my favorite character, because his voice and the punchlines he has, he's this very cynical Lee Van Cleef character, and I just love him. I mean, yeah, he's great.
Is there something that was kind of, this is my favorite character, this is my favorite aspect of the game, things that carried through now to the Desperados 3?
Yeah, like some characters have just made it to Desperados 3, obviously. I'm a huge fan of Doc McCoy, like the sniping, that's super iconic, also with the scope on your screen, that's like such a simple thing, but it's so iconic, and I love it so much. And that was always something where we're like, okay, I want to have that in any game like that.
What were the things that you were looking at, or that you were reading, watching to kind of get that? That crispness, the dialogue right.
Yeah, maybe a bit because I also don't want to kind of like claim things here that were more kind of like obviously. a combined effort. So first of all, when going back to the zombie idea, and when we kind of like we as Infogram talked to Spellbound and say, look guys, can we change this into more spaghetti Western scenario? And they, like I said, they were completely on board right from the beginning. They already had at least 10, maybe even 12 levels. At least from the art side, at least as scribbles. So they scribbled all the levels, obviously first, made concept, and kind of like already had decided on a lot of interesting scenarios. Like, we'll have a city, we'll have a gold mine. This would be a great scenario. We need to get a train there. So they got all the inspiration from this different Westerns. So the first thing we had to come up with was actually the plot itself. So what will happen in the game? What happens to the gang and this whole thing with Sanchez and El Diablo, and who is El Diablo? We didn't know who El Diablo was. In the beginning, the idea was that Sanchez, who's now just a henchman of him, would turn out to be El Diablo. This was all done together. So we were sitting together with Jean-Marc and the whole team at Spellbound. We were kind of like had lots of meetings. We had a war room, and what we did is we always posted all the different level concepts on the wall and tried to stand in front and say, okay, when in this level this happens, what could happen in this level, and how can we make a plot around it? So we kind of like first built the overall plot around especially the levels that were already there and the ideas for different levels, additional levels that Spellbound already had in mind. And so we kind of like went back and forth. Okay, no, this level, well, no, then this level needs to go here, and they could go from here to here. And so this was the first thing that we did. And we always wanted the dialogues actually to be written by a script writer. I mean, I had some roots in writing before, and I was working for as a journalist for a while, and did some books as well. But I was kind of like, A, as a producer, I don't have the time, and B, let's find somebody who can do that. And we had a script writer, but the thing is, due to some bureaucracies, and like I said, during that time, Infogram was kind of like on a buying spree, and they had a lot of companies they just bought. I couldn't get hold of anybody in the legal department at Infogram to just get a contract out to the scriptwriter. And the scriptwriter, I was like, no worries, you're getting paid. We're a big company, but the scriptwriter, because in TV it seems to be, you need to be very careful, obviously, or in movies. So he said, I will not start without a contract, which is fair enough. But we couldn't get him a contract on time, and we had already booked the studio for the voice recordings. And I was like, okay, you know what, guys, I will write it. So I wrote down the German. So actually for that game, we did the German voice recordings first. Which again, it is another great story I have to tell you in a second, which caused another issue then. So I wrote the text, but obviously in close collaboration again, especially with Jean-Marc and everybody. But I did the main writing for all the dialogues.
The story and setting were heavily influenced by classic spaghetti Western movies with Clint Eastwood, and also by 80s action films like Lethal Weapon or Big Trouble in Little China, and modern Westerns such as Sam Raimi's The Quick and the Dead. But there were quite a few more movie Easter eggs to be found.
And there's also, I mean, this famous scene, this Easter egg with dogs in the swamp, where he kind of like does his Jedi trick with the boat coming out of the swamp. And the problem was though, so for the cutscenes that you see in the game, for this high-res renderings, we had to do, it's like when they do, for example, a Pixar movie, that's also what they do there. They first do the voice recordings and film the actors, Tom Hanks, when he's doing his kind of like making his text or speaking his text, and then they take the lip movings and take that for the movie, then the Pixar movies, and animate the characters so it fits the lip moving of the text that is spoken. And we did the same for the text for the cutscene. So when John Cooper talks, we did the voice recordings first, filmed the actor, and the graphics studio did the lip syncs. What we didn't consider is we did the German text, which was stupid because German is way longer than English. And any German voice actor is used to getting English films and he's dubbing it, and then he cuts out lines or speaks faster, so it always fits the English. But the English actors, A, weren't used to dub German lips movings, and B, the text was just too long. They said, guys, we don't have that many words to fill in the text here, so it still fits to the lip movings. And never again I did afterwards for any other game I worked on the German voice recordings first to do the lip syncs, because that was a very stupid idea. Yeah. So if in the English version, the dubbing sometimes is not looking good, that's on me.
Oh, a pear. That's very nice indeed.
Go hang it.
Uh-oh. 2 pairs. A pair of kings and a pair of aces.
Talking about the Western stories, Desperados 1 was very, very much influenced by spaghetti westerns, where you have basically direct takes on scenes from Once Upon a Time in the West and the good and the bad and the ugly. So when you started working on the game, were there like movie nights at Mimimi Studios, or did you just work off what you already had absorbed?
No, like we did our research and we also watched those movies before, like all the spaghetti stuff, and we also looked at the new Western influences. There are like not too many, but like it had a small peak, and something like Westworld is pretty cool and another take, a very strange take on it. But we looked at all those and we had our design goal was kind of having like the old and the new. It was in a lot of aspects we had like old and new. We want to combine it and make something Mimimi unique out of it. I think now in the end we're a bit more leaning towards the old than the new stuff. I think it's still like, now looking at it, more the classic came through in the game, but in all the aspects we try to have like modern things in it.
Let's talk a little bit about the difficulty levels, or working difficulty levels, because talking to Ralph about the design for Desperados 1, he said one thing that he was kind of sad about that they didn't manage was to tweak the difficulty or put at different levels. So did you kind of find yourself confronted with the same problems to gauge how new players would approach this and how hard it would be for them?
Yeah, so that was also a learning, like from Shadow Tactics, that we were like, okay, we want to improve on that aspect. We want to make it easier in a way. And yeah, the only way to make this like substantial working is that you have to like really tweak the enemy setups, like the puzzles. And that is a lot of work. But that was very clear from the beginning that we really want to do that and put in that extra effort. And I think also there we have a learning now that when you know what to tweak, it's then getting easier to bring in those difficulty levels. So in the beginning, it was very hard to figure out what it means, or at what point you would like completely make a puzzle, like not a puzzle anymore, but like you just click everybody dead and that's it. There's no challenge, because it is only fun if there's a challenge, and to know at what point that breaks and there's no challenge anymore, that was a point we have to like really figure out. But when we got a feeling for that, it worked pretty well, I would say.
Okay, so was there ever a point where you realized, talking with testers, talking with QA, that at some point you had built something that for most people was uncrackable, or things like that?
Yeah, so the usual process most of the time was when you like start, or a designer starts to build a level and you first play it, that it is way too hard.
Okay.
But also with the experience, they were getting like very much better at that. But it's when you build a puzzle, you always know the solution, and it's very hard to abstract or think in a way of the player not knowing the things. And some things that you think in the first, they're so obviously that for one player, they just look at it and then they just don't see it. And then it's becoming super hard. And if they're like, oh, that would be the one thing, then it's super easy. But also we learned that throughout the map, nearly every player has that moment at some point. So there's always this, like one puzzle would be super hard for somebody, even if it's not intended, because like something where we thought is like the super obvious solution or approach would not be like in their mind at the time. So,
but then once they have the light bulb moment, it goes smoothly. Okay.
So, but that helps because you always know, okay, at some point there will be a challenge in for the player. So we could be more like say, okay, let's make it throughout a bit easier because those moments will happen anyways. But on hard, we would like force them in.
I'm for Desperados 3. I'm mainly a fan who played the game through and kind of like, with very warm feelings, had a very great time. I think the only thing I must say, but see, that's the thing. Even on hard, for me, it's too easy. But hey, I'm not the benchmark here, obviously. So.
No. Do you remember other moments during production working with Spellbound where things just didn't work out, or where things suddenly worked out in a different way, in a surprising way? Things that seem like they are absolutely meant to be in the final game, but that were kind of just coincidence or serendipity?
Let me think about this. I mean, generally until today, and I'm now almost in my 30 years of game development. It was still one of the best developments I've ever been kind of like involved with regards to the collaboration. And I mean, it's always kind of like the ideal that the publisher and the developer working in the same direction and running in the same direction and share the same vision. I mean, there is always on the way, there's sometimes struggle and sometimes there are things somebody wants to do differently, either on one side or the other. But that was one of the smoothest sailing I've really ever been into. I mean, you can already tell from it's also, I'd say even the game that was most on time, budget, and quality ever. And so we signed the contract, like I said, in late 99. And the original plan was to ship it in late 2000, so 1 year later for the Christmas business. But already when we signed the contract, it was Infogrames actually who said, look, guys, we really believe in this title and we think you should spend some more time. So we give you 4 extra months and we even pay for it. So we make this an Easter release, not a Christmas release. And that came from Infogrames. Usually it's the developer who asks for more time or more money. And obviously the developer said, sure, that sounds awesome. We gladly take the money. And then it was the Easter release. So they released it on time. And it came out really on time with the planned scope, with all the 25 levels that were planned. There were some hiccups along the way, mostly when it came, but that's more on the natural side. It was mostly like marketing, when sometimes some ads were produced in France and Spellbound was looking at it and they weren't really happy with what came out of that. And then there were some back and forth on that. But that was all kind of like, that there wasn't really that much. There was one thing, and I mentioned it, that wasn't that well, which was the fact that, like I said, we had 2 dedicated testers at Spellbound for the game, but the publisher always also does his own QA as well. So as a publisher, I mean, no matter what you get from a developer, and even if it tells you, yeah, we tested it inside out, there are no bugs, you obviously want to check it again and maybe also give some additional feedback. One of the problems there was that there was nobody in the QA department who was familiar with strategy games or tactic games. So the feedback we got there sometimes was very kind of like, yeah, can you take out all more or less the strategy elements and make it more an adventure game? And we were like, kind of, no, this is not the game we're going to do, because obviously the DNA and the roots, and if you look into what Infogrames did, mostly games like Alone in the Dark, they were way more in another genre. So this was really their first strategy game. So that was sometimes a bit bumpy, but again, it was on a level where I'd say, I mean, if I've seen way worse for other games. We can shed some light on this here because many fans out there might be aware with the legendary webisodes, and if not, so that was the idea that after the game was released, Infogrames wanted to release 6 more levels or what they call webisodes because they wanted to release it only in the web. So that was their first kind of like attempt to test out this magical new thing called the internet. And Spellbound actually even produced those levels. Some of them actually then later made it into, at least from the level design, into Desperados 2, like the Fort. But they made all the levels, but Infogrames never managed, unfortunately, to get these out. Why that was, I don't know, to be honest, because that was after I left Infogrames. So like I said, I left after the original game was released, and when Spellbound just started on these webisodes. So ultimately, they produced 6 additional levels, but they never saw the day of light. And like I said, the funny story behind that is that Bruno Bonnell, who was the CEO of Infogrames back in the days, so a bit like what Yves Guillemot is to Ubisoft. He was this charismatic leader of Infogrames. Once visited us in our office, the Infogrames office in Germany, when we were working on the game, me and my associate producer, and said, I love this game. I've already heard so much good about it, and I want you guys to make it a online game. And we were like, this is a single player. It doesn't even have a multiplayer modus. How do you want to make it an online game? And he said, no, the internet will be the next big thing, which he was absolutely right about it. And that was 2000. So it's funny. Bruno back in 2000 said, in the future, and he called that nomadic gaming, we will we will play with our watches, we will play with our phones, we will have displays even on refrigerators that are linked to the internet, and you can even play on these. And we were just like, this guy is kind of like a bit crazy. But he was absolutely right. I mean, it was 10 years too early, but hey, I mean, that shows what kind of a visionary he was. But nevertheless, he wanted us to make turn Desperados into an online game, and we were like, not going to happen, sorry. And that's when we came up with this idea, but maybe we can do these episodes and you can just release them into the internet. And he said, yeah, that's a great idea. And he was happy. And that's how that kind of like was, that idea was born.
But it never actually then panned out. So those levels are just lost.
They are the lost levels, yes, unfortunately. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one last thing I have here is about what was supposed to be kind of a spin-off, Eldorado.
Yeah.
If you know anything about it, how that game came to be and why it's actually not a Desperados game, or at least not officially.
Yeah. Again, for that one, I'm even also in the credits, but I think the only thing I did for Eldorado was the voice recordings. And I was booked directly by Spellbound, if I remember correctly. Or was I booked by DTP? I can't tell you anymore. But what I know about it is that Spellbound wanted to do another game after that. They already had some ideas, and like I said, they were happy with some things in Desperados 2, but they also agreed that other things weren't working out that well, and they wanted to take these learnings and just make a better game, either a Desperados 2.5 or a huge add-on that you could sell maybe even for full price or whatever. And so they, I think even they had some level material already that didn't make it in Desperados 2, but I might be wrong on that part. But they reached out to Infogrames/Atari and said, we want to work on another game because, like I said, they still own the brand, the Desperados brand. But Infogrames wasn't too interested in that. And they were already, I mean, one of the reasons actually why I left Infogrames after Desperados was that already back then, Bruno Bonnell, the CEO, announced that they would like to focus more on console games in the future and kind of like get rid of the PC market. And for me, as I was working in strategy games, I was kind of like, I don't believe in strategy games on console, so I'd rather love to continue working in PC games, and that's why I changed. And after Desperados 2, it was even more clear, so Infogrames was cutting all of its roots to PC gaming, and so they didn't have any interest. But the thing is that the contract was, I think, made in a way that Infogrames owned the name Desperados, but they did not own the name for the heroes. So John Cooper, Kate O'Hara, all the heroes, they were kind of like copyright, trademark, whatever, by Spellbound. So they owned the rights to the heroes they created. So the only thing they couldn't do was to make a Desperados 3, but they could make a game, whatever, and then use the heroes for that. And so they pitched it to a German publisher, which was DTP up in Hamburg. Also, they don't exist anymore, unfortunately, these days. But they were also kind of like a medium-sized publisher back in the mid-2000s. And they signed it, and then they made it. And like I said, I think I only did the voice recordings there for that one. Because I did the voice recordings for Desperados 1 and 2, and I knew the voice actors and how to direct them and everything, so they just hired me for that one. But other than that, I think I have not many roots to Eldorado. Yeah.
But that, okay, so it was basically a Desperados game and all but the Desperados
yeah.
game.
So if you're out for more Desperados fun and you have never heard of that game before, check it out. I think it's definitely the better Desperados 2. It's a bit shorter, and I think one, in my opinion, main flaw it has, but this is more just from a game design perspective, but it starts with a very dark and rainy level. And from a game design perspective, you should always start with something more bright and easy and lighthearted, because it puts you right from the beginning in a very depressed mode, which I found weird back in the day. But the game, like I said, they took all the learnings from Desperados 2. So with regards to the level design and the balancing and everything, I think Eldorado personally, I think is way better than Desperados 2. But that's my personal opinion.
If you're watching this, you can win the smallest collector's edition in the whole Wild West, or a normal Desperados Collector's Edition, or the amazing original soundtrack on vinyl, or amazing Desperados artworks from Displayed. To participate, go to desperadosgame.com and follow the instructions. You will fill out a very short Desperados survey form to participate in the raffles and maybe influence the future of the Desperados franchise. And have you also been aware of the things that kind of happened around the game, things like the extra special edition with tiny dioramas, or things like the role-playing game? So how does that feel to have all these add-ons, basically?
That always gives you the feel that, whoa, this is big. Because it's not just a game, it grows like on the sides. And like one thing I have to point out is like the diorama trailer. Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
I love that one so much. I don't know, I'm a bit sad because it did not get the attention I think it would deserve. Maybe that's because of the timing, and we had a lot of trailers there, and also it's not this like super flashy. It's more like, it's kind of like a piece of art, I would say. It's more like you watch it and you just enjoy it, but I think it just perfectly hits the mood, and it's so well crafted. Like, it's impressive.
You've looked at and you've played Desperados 3 and you've looked at what Mimimi have done. So you are kind of happy with the legacy?
I'm the happiest man I could be with that game. I mean, I know the guys quite well, and when they did the first game, or the first tactic game, not the first game, the Shogun game, I already consulted is already too much. But as I knew them before, even back when they were students, I went to their office several times, and already back then, pretty much gave them all the insights I'm giving you now on what we did in Desperados, learnings we had, also showed them some level designs and stuff like that. So I already did that for the first game, and then I did that again for Desperados 3 in the very beginning, kind of like tell them again, okay, what were our ideas? But I've already always told them, this game is 20 years ago, and we tried to make this kind of game. Today I would make so many things differently, also from the storytelling perspective, and things we did there, things that might be, even from a political correctness, I'd say, looking at that today, that's close to being a bit cringy. Take the game and make it your legacy. Make whatever you want out of that, and they did. And I'm happy that they still stuck to so many things that I think were so they just took the best of what Desperados was and just made it better. So I'm very happy. I think they even gave me credits. Thanks for that. That's already too much. I think a special thanks or something. Looking back now, that Desperados 3 is done and now celebrating kind of the birthday of the whole series of games. How happy are you with what you turned in, with what you did? Is there a pride in kind of having revived not a genre, but also kind of a series of games that you grew up with?
Definitely. No, we are super happy with the results and the perception and everything around it, and like so much feedback from the fans, and that I'm so happy that we really like valued that IP and made it something that's, but I would say, okay, that's a Desperados how I could have imagined it, and that's a honor and such an achievement to have that delivered. No, like there's like not a single point where we're not like, we're not happy about it. That's really cool.